There's a particular glow that comes with wearing a wedding gown under chandeliers, with champagne flutes clinking and love songs swirling through the air. That glow was mine, at least for a few fleeting minutes. My name was Camille Everett Hart for less than an hour, and in that hour, I thought I had everything I'd ever wanted. The lace of my dress shimmered every time I turned, the champagne was crisp on my tongue, and Julian's hand had just left my waist to greet a guest when it all began to unravel. I was standing near the floral arch, white orchids like we planned, when I saw him read the message. His face, already flushed from the dancing and the buzz of the celebration, drained of color so fast I thought he might faint. He was holding his phone just inches from his face like the screen might change if he stared hard enough. I watched his lips move without sound, forming a short phrase I couldn't hear. "Julian?" I called, stepping closer. He looked up at me like I was a stranger. I have to go," he stammered. Then he turned and started walking. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. At first, I laughed. Not out of joy, out of confusion. Maybe a family emergency, maybe a joke. Someone had to be playing a trick, right? Grooms don't just leave receptions. Not after they say their vows. Not after the photos and the first kiss and the cake cutting. But he didn't come back. Not in 5 minutes. Not in 15. Not in an hour. I stood there while conversations around me quieted, confusion rippling through the guests like a cold wind. My best friend Mia approached me carefully, like I might shatter. "Camille," she whispered, brushing a hand down my arm, "do you know where he went?" I shook my head. I couldn't answer. My voice was lodged somewhere between my chest and throat. I could still hear the music, could still feel the eyes of 100 people watching me. The girl in the gown. The abandoned bride. The stunning spectacle of a love story gone terribly wrong. I walked to the edge of the ballroom, clutching the sides of my dress. The air was thick with perfume and confusion. Julian's mother stood off to the side, holding a napkin to her mouth like she might be sick. My own parents looked like they couldn't decide between anger and heartbreak. And me, I just wanted to disappear. In the hallway outside, I dialed his number. Once, twice, 5 times. Straight to voicemail. "Julian, where are you? What happened?" My message was a breathless whisper. The kind you leave when you're still convincing yourself this can't be real. I thought about our vows. About the way his eyes had shone just an hour ago, the way he'd said, "I do," with a tremble in his voice that I mistook for emotion. God, I thought we were solid. I thought we were something unshakable. The kind of love you could count on. Instead, I stood barefoot on the cold marble floor, my heels discarded behind me, staring at the exit sign he had walked through. I didn't cry. Not yet. Crying would mean admitting it was real. Inside, the reception limped on like a wounded animal. A few well-meaning guests tried to distract me, an uncle offering champagne, an old classmate joking about stage fright, but nothing touched the numbness inside me. I sat at the sweetheart table alone, surrounded by untouched food and wilting flowers. My name card said, Mrs. Hart. It looked like a cruel joke. Around 10, someone boxed up the leftover cake. A catering assistant handed me a slice in a glossy white box with a too cheerful ribbon tied around it. I took it without thinking, holding it in my lap like it might offer answers. I went back to our hotel suite that night alone. The bed was made up with rose petals. The champagne on ice had lost its chill. I sank to the edge of the mattress, still in my dress, and finally let the tears come. They fell silently at first, then shook me from the inside out. What was I supposed to do now? Call the venue? Write thank you cards for a wedding that ended mid-reception? I peeled off the gown, one zipper at a time, and let it fall to the floor like a silk exhale. I stood in the mirror in nothing but a slip, mascara streaked down my cheeks, and wondered if I'd been a fool this whole time. How do you explain something like this to people? How do you explain it to yourself? I curled into the center of the bed that was meant for two, wrapped myself in a blanket that didn't feel warm, and stared at the ceiling until the sun peeked through the curtains. I didn't sleep. I didn't speak. I just lay there, replaying the moment over and over. The phone, his face, the words, I have to go. That was the moment everything broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, in a way that left no room for repair. And just like that, the wedding that wasn't became the first page of a story I never saw coming. It started with coffee. Not some metaphorical idea of warmth and comfort, but actual scalding hot coffee splattered across my white coat in the middle of a chaotic hospital corridor. I had just finished a 12-hour pediatric shift, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, when a man, tall, broad-shouldered, far too calm for the buzzing energy of St. Elora, turned a corner too fast and collided straight into me. The coffee cup he held tipped sideways, the contents baptizing my coat and scrubs in a sticky cascade. I gasped, jerking back. Oh my God, that was my last clean set. His eyes were wide with apology and then something else, kindness. I am so sorry. Let me help. He reached for the napkins he didn't have, clearly a man unprepared for emergency coffee spills. Too late for napkins, I muttered, trying to suppress the panic that rose every time I felt unprepared or disheveled. I look like I lost a battle with a coffee machine. He smiled, not laughing at me, just with that rare ease that made you want to stay a moment longer than necessary. Well, the machine never stood a chance. It was ridiculous. It was minor. But it was the first time I smiled that day. His name was Julian Hart, an architect consulting on the new pediatric wing being added to the hospital. I'm just the guy arguing about light angles and window placements, he said when I asked. I didn't expect to see him again, but 2 days later, I found him in the Atrium Cafe, sketching something on a napkin, completely absorbed. I was in line behind him. He glanced up, recognized me, and this time had an actual apology in the form of a coffee, my exact order. I figured I owed you one, he said, handing it over with a slight grin. No spills this time, promise. I could have walked away. I usually did when men tried to be charming. But something about Julian made me pause. Maybe it was the way he seemed comfortable with silence, or how his eyes didn't dart around the room looking for someone more interesting to talk to. We started sharing lunch breaks, just here and there, talking about books, travel, the weirdness of hospital life. I told him about my grueling residency schedule, my dreams of specializing in pediatric pulmonology, the way children's resilience constantly amazed me. He told me about designing spaces that made people feel safe, his passion for buildings that didn't just stand, they breathed with the people inside them. Our conversation slipped into something softer. He met me with calm every time I brought my chaos. When I vented about a misdiagnosis or a child that crashed unexpectedly, he didn't try to fix it. He just listened. Present. Steady. I didn't know I was falling until I realized I was thinking about him on nights I should have been sleeping. One evening, I found a note tucked inside my locker. Meet me in the greenhouse. J. The hospital greenhouse was tucked behind the south wing, a quiet little oasis filled with aloe, lavender, and orchids donated by grateful families over the years. It was there that I found Julian, standing under the glow of soft string lights he must have hung himself. He turned when he heard me. I thought you might need a reason to breathe today. I did. I always did. And somehow he had known. That night marked the shift. The one where I went from admiring him to imagining a life with him. The kisses that followed were slow, exploratory, reverent. He tasted like mint and coffee and the kind of love I hadn't let myself believe in before. We moved slowly. Dates turned into sleepovers. Sleepovers into shared weekends. He'd meet me after long shifts with soup or leave flowers in my car. When I told him about my mother's death during my first year of med school and how I still kept her old stethoscope in my drawer, he didn't fill the silence with platitudes. He just squeezed my hand, grounding me. The proposal came a year later. In the same greenhouse, now blooming with spring. I walked in to find it transformed, candles flickering along the benches, orchids overhead. He stood in the center holding a small, simple ring. No speech, no theatrics. Just, Camille Everett, you make my life better in every way. Will you marry me? I said yes without hesitation. My voice didn't tremble. My heart didn't doubt. It felt inevitable. Our engagement wasn't flashy. We were two professionals navigating chaotic careers, choosing wedding colors in between hospital emergencies and architecture deadlines. But it worked. It felt balanced. Right. And so, when I stood at that altar weeks ago, I didn't question a single thing. Not the vows he wrote by hand, not the emotion in his voice, not the way he brushed a tear from my cheek during our first dance. I believed in us with every fiber of my being. That's what makes what happened at the reception so impossible to comprehend. I keep replaying our love story like a movie reel, searching for clues I missed. Was it too perfect? Too quiet? Did I romanticize the stillness because it gave me peace? Or was it real? As real as it felt? Because if it was, then how could he walk away like that? How could someone who once made a home in the chaos of my world become the storm that blew it all apart? The apartment was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that settles after a long day, but the hollow, aching sort that amplifies everything you're trying to ignore. The tick of the wall clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle, ghostly rustle of a dress that still hung in the closet, untouched since the night it all fell apart. I had taken it off in a daze and hung it there like a question I was too afraid to answer. It hadn't moved since. I buried myself in work. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. At the hospital, I could lose myself in charts and cases and children who needed me. There was no room for confusion when a baby's oxygen levels dropped or a parent's eyes searched mine for reassurance. There, I had purpose. At home, I just had silence. The wedding gifts piled up like unopened promises. Stacked boxes with satin ribbons, cards I couldn't bring myself to read, and embossed tags that read, "To the hearts." I didn't know what to do with any of it. Returning them felt like admitting the end. Keeping them felt like a cruel joke. So I ignored them, sidestepped them every morning, like furniture that had always been part of the room. Julian's absence was an echo. His toothbrush was still in the holder. His favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle, sat by the sink. I couldn't bring myself to move these things. It was as if I believed he might come back for them. For me. That maybe he'd walk through the door with an apology and a reason, and everything would start making sense. But the days turned into weeks, and there was nothing. I called. I texted. I emailed. At first with urgency, then desperation, then silence of my own. The line always went to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Julian. Leave a message." That voice, once the sound that grounded me, became unbearable. I left messages until my voice cracked. Then I stopped altogether. His social media went dark too. Not that he posted much, but now even the tagged photos vanished. His last Instagram post was a picture of our hands entwined over blueprints of our future home. I remember the caption, "Building more than walls." It felt like a lie now. I tried reaching out to his business partner, Greg, a man I barely knew outside of suit fittings and cocktail banter. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "I haven't seen Julian since the week before your wedding," he said. "Thought maybe he was on some honeymoon escape?" When I told him what happened, the silence on the other end was heavy. "Jesus, Camille. I'm so sorry." I had no idea. Neither did I wanted to scream. That night, I sat in my bed, and stared at the empty pillow beside me. I wondered where he was sleeping. If he was sleeping. If he missed the sound of my laugh or the way I hummed while making tea. Did he even think about me? Or had he already moved on into some secret, hidden life that didn't include the woman he promised forever? I wanted answers. But more than that, I wanted my life back. I stopped correcting people when they called me Dr. Hart. I didn't have the energy to explain that I was still Camille Everett. Still standing in the wreckage of a marriage that ended before it had a chance to begin. My colleagues tiptoed around me, unsure of what to say. Some asked gently, "How was the honeymoon?" I gave a tight-lipped smile and said, "Short." Others didn't ask at all. The worst part was not knowing why. If there had been another woman, a betrayal, a death, something concrete, I could have placed my pain somewhere. But this was different. It was shapeless. A void. There were nights I'd lie awake, convinced I'd missed something. A look. A hesitation. Did he seem distracted the week before? Was he nervous at the rehearsal dinner? Did his hand shake when he slid the ring onto my finger? I started replaying everything, searching for cracks. It was like living with a phantom limb, something I couldn't see, but still felt the absence of. One night, I went to the beach where we had planned to take post-wedding photos. I sat on the sand until the tide crept up and soaked the hem of my jeans. I whispered his name to the wind. I think I wanted the ocean to answer, but all I heard was waves crashing, cold, constant, indifferent. The loneliness didn't hit all at once. It seeped in slowly, curling around the edges of my life until it choked the color out of things. My morning coffee tasted bitter. My favorite playlist sounded like static. Even the children I cared for couldn't reach the parts of me that had shut down. I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo, waiting for someone who had already made the choice to disappear. So I did what I knew how to do. I showed up. For the kids. For the families. For myself in the smallest ways. I washed the mug. I opened one of the wedding gifts, a set of matching bookends shaped like birds in flight. I placed them on my shelf. One day I'd remove the second one. But not yet. For now, I let the void exist. I didn't try to fill it. I just acknowledged it. Let it ache. And slowly, quietly, I began to survive it. I wasn't looking for answers that night. I wasn't even looking to be found. I just wanted to feel anonymous for a few hours, away from pitying stares and coworkers pretending not to ask the obvious. The bar on Halden Street wasn't my usual kind of place. Too loud, too moody, but it served wine without questions, and that was enough. I was nursing my second glass of Merlot when I heard my name, hesitantly spoken. Camille? I turned slowly, not recognizing the voice at first. Then my eyes landed on Milo Arentz, an old mutual friend of Julian's. We'd met a few times at dinner parties and charity mixers. He was the kind of guy who always smelled like cedarwood and wore button-downs like they were armor. Tonight, he looked more disheveled than I'd ever seen him, like life had caught up to him, too. Milo, I said, my voice flat but not unkind. I wasn't in the mood for socializing, but I couldn't bring myself to dismiss him. He looked awkward, shifted on his feet. Mind if I sit? I gestured toward the empty stool. He ordered a drink, then let the silence between us stretch until it became a wall. I was sorry to hear what happened. At the wedding, he said finally, carefully. I stared into my glass. Were you? He sighed. Yeah, I was. I didn't know what compelled me to speak the next words. Maybe it was the wine or the silence or the way I'd grown tired of pretending. Do you know where he is? Milo hesitated, and in that pause, something in me tightened. I haven't seen him, he said slowly. But I heard something. Don't know if it's true. I sat up. What did you hear? He ran a hand through his hair, avoiding my eyes. That Lena Cross, Julian's ex, was trying to get in touch with him. Right around the time of your wedding. The name hit me like a cold slap. Lena Cross. The woman he had dated before me. The one he never spoke of in much detail, except to say it had ended badly. What do you mean, trying to get in touch? Milo finally looked at me. I heard. She told him she was pregnant. My breath caught. I stared at him, unblinking, heart pounding in my ears. She called him. Maybe even showed up. No one really knows the full story. I didn't want to bring it up because it's messy, and it's not my business. But you deserve the truth, Camille. I sat still, too still, while his words sank in. A pregnancy. A lie? A truth? An excuse? A manipulation? My fingers curled around the base of my wine glass, anchoring me. She did this at our wedding, I said slowly, the pieces beginning to form a shape I didn't like. He read that text and walked out on everything. Milo nodded faintly. That's what I heard. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But more than anything, I wanted to understand. I thought back to every conversation we'd ever had about Lena. The way Julian's voice would tighten. How he always said she was complicated. But I never pressed. I didn't want to poke at old wounds. And now here I was, bleeding from them. The next morning, I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by wedding photos I hadn't hung, letters I hadn't opened, fragments of a life that was supposed to begin that day. I stared at Julian's face in one of the prints, his eyes crinkled from laughing just moments before the ceremony. How could someone look that happy and still leave? Unless he didn't plan to. Unless something made him. The possibility gnawed at me. Had Julian been manipulated? Was he taken back into something toxic? Something he didn't know how to fight? I thought about calling him again. My phone hovered in my hand for what felt like hours. But I didn't dial. Not yet. Instead, I typed Lena Cross's name into every social media platform I could think of. Most of her accounts were private, but her profile picture on one caught my attention. She was holding a glass of champagne, her other hand resting lightly on a flat stomach. No bump. No sign of pregnancy. The photo was posted just days after the wedding. My stomach turned. Was it all a lie? A calculated moment to pull Julian back into her orbit? And if so, why did he let it work? I wanted to feel angry, but more than that, I felt betrayed. Not just by Julian, but by the silence. The lack of explanation. The void he had left behind and the damage it continued to do. That night, I sat with my journal for the first time in weeks. I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud. Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. Maybe he panicked. But he owed me more than a vanishing act. He owed me the truth. I stared at the words until they blurred. The next morning, I folded away the wedding gown. Not as a gesture of closure, but as an act of reclamation. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a name. A thread to pull. A crack in the silence. Lena Cross. I wasn't going to chase ghosts. But I also wasn't going to let the past dictate the narrative any longer. If Julian left because of a lie, then I needed to know. And I needed to decide, on my terms, what to do with the pieces he left behind. I met Theo on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day where the sky refused to commit to a storm, but hovered just enough to dampen everything, streets, moods, and the sleeves of my coat. I was in the break room at St. Elora, nursing the worst vending machine coffee and trying to stay awake between patient rounds, when the door opened and in walked a man balancing 2 cups of real coffee and a clipboard under his arm. His scrubs were wrinkled, his hair damp from the rain, and his expression somewhere between tired and kind. "Are you Dr. Everett?" he asked, his eyes scanning the badge clipped to my coat. "That depends," I said, half smiling. If this is about the vending machine breaking again, I had nothing to do with it. He laughed, soft and warm. "Actually, this is for you." He handed me one of the coffees. "From the PICU nurses. They said you've been running nonstop for 3 shifts straight." I blinked, surprised. "You're the new nurse, aren't you?" "Theo Martin." He nodded, shifting the clipboard to his other hand. "That's me. First week. Trying to win friends with caffeine." I took the cup gratefully. "Well, you're off to a good start." We stood in companionable silence for a moment, sipping and watching the rain streak across the windows. I didn't know then that this stranger with rain in his hair would become something so vital. I didn't know he would eventually stitch together parts of me I didn't realize were still bleeding. Our next conversation happened by Iris's bedside. She was 8 years old, small for her age, and braver than most adults I knew. Diagnosed with cystic fibrosis before her 2nd birthday, she had spent more time in the hospital than any child should. That day, she was sitting up, cheeks flushed from fever, playing with a stuffed penguin in one hand and clutching a nebulizer mask in the other. "This is Dr. Everett," Theo told her gently. "She's going to make sure your lungs stay tough as nails." Iris eyed me with suspicion at first, then cracked the tiniest smile. "Do you like penguins?" "I adore penguins," I said, sitting beside her. "Especially the ones that wear bow ties." From that moment, Iris decided I was acceptable. Theo and I quickly learned that approval from Iris was a privilege, not a right. We started seeing each other in the hallways more often, coffee in hand, exhaustion in our eyes. It wasn't flirtation at first. It was connection. Subtle and slow. We'd swap notes about patients, laugh about hospital politics, grumble about the food. Theo had a quiet steadiness about him. He didn't push, didn't pry. He asked how I was, and when I gave him the half-hearted "fine," he never challenged me, but he didn't believe it, either. That unspoken understanding created space. Space I hadn't had with anyone since the wedding. One night, after a difficult case, I found myself sitting in the small family courtyard outside the hospital, shivering in the cold. I had lost a patient earlier. A baby born too early, lungs too fragile. I hadn't cried. Not in front of anyone. But sitting there in the quiet, the weight pressed in. Theo found me. "Bad night?" he asked softly, settling onto the bench beside me. I didn't answer right away. Just nodded. "Iris had a hard day too," he said after a moment. "Her cough is worse." But she drew a picture of a dragon doctor fighting a mucus monster. "Named it after you." That broke me. Not into tears, but into something softer. I laughed, a shaky breath that carried more gratitude than joy. "She's incredible," I whispered. "She is." Theo looked at me, his gaze gentle. "So are you." From there, something began to grow between us. Slowly, respectfully. We didn't rush it. We talked. A lot. About medicine. About Iris's good days and bad. About my past and his, how he became a nurse after losing his wife to cancer, how Iris was the reason he kept breathing. He didn't wear his pain like a badge, but he didn't hide it either. "I never thought I'd be here again," he said one evening as we walked the hospital halls after a long shift. "Connecting with someone. Letting anyone in." "Me either," I admitted. I didn't think I had anything left to give. But somehow we did. Not because we were trying to replace what we'd lost, but because we saw each other clearly. No illusions. No expectations. Just truth. Iris played a quiet role in all of it. Her drawings started to include me, stick figure versions of Theo, her, and Dr. Cammy, riding unicorns or climbing mountains. She never asked about Julian. She didn't need to. Kids have a way of understanding what adults try to hide. And with every passing day, the hole inside me didn't feel so cavernous. I was still healing. Still unsure. But I wasn't alone anymore. Theo didn't fill the void Julian left. He helped me realize I didn't need it filled at all. I needed something new. Something honest. And slowly, that's exactly what we became. There were moments I didn't recognize my own life anymore, not in a bad way, but in that surreal, slow-blooming kind of way that sneaks up on you after surviving something unbearable. Years had passed since the wedding that wasn't. Time, as it does, had moved forward whether I wanted it to or not. My days were still filled with hospital rounds, late-night charting, and the occasional emergency, but the edges of my life had softened. I was no longer the woman holding her breath for answers. I was Camille Everett, pediatric pulmonary specialist, daughter, friend, partner. I was still learning to carry grief without letting it consume me. But now I had a rhythm again. One built not on perfect expectations, but quiet, deliberate healing. And at the center of that rhythm was Theo and Iris. Our life together wasn't flashy. It was Sunday morning pancakes with music playing too loud, Iris dancing in socks across the kitchen tiles. It was staying up late helping her with homework, brushing her hair into 2 wobbly braids before bed, and watching Theo fall asleep on the couch halfway through a documentary we both promised we'd finish. It was simple. And it was sacred. Theo moved in a little over a year after we first met. The decision wasn't made with fanfare, it just made sense. One night he forgot to pack clothes and never really left after that. We fit. And not in the fiery, dramatic way I used to think love needed to be. We fit like a song that stayed in your bones. Iris started calling me Cammy instead of Dr. Everett somewhere around year 2. The first time it slipped out, she looked at me like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. I smiled so wide it hurt. That small gesture, her choosing me, meant more than she could have known. Still, part of me held on to hesitation. Not because I didn't love them, but because the past had taught me how easily love could vanish. And even when Theo wrapped his arms around me at night, even when Iris said things like, "We're your family now," I felt the old scars tugging beneath the surface. I never spoke Julian's name around them. I had tucked that chapter away like an old journal I couldn't burn but didn't dare reread. And yet, despite the fear, love found its way in. The proposal happened on an ordinary afternoon in April. The sun had finally started warming the sidewalks again, and we'd all gone down to the park near the hospital, the one with the old oak tree and the swings that always made Iris giggle. She'd had a good checkup earlier that week. Her breathing was stronger, her appetite back. That day she ran farther than I'd seen her run in months. We were sitting on a picnic blanket when she tugged at my sleeve and handed me a drawing, crayons on folded paper. I opened it slowly. At first, I thought it was another of her whimsical scenes, our little stick figure family riding flying turtles or something. But this time, it was different. It was the three of us, holding hands, standing in front of a house with hearts drawn in every window. Above our heads was a banner in her blocky, determined handwriting. Say yes. When I looked up, Theo was already on one knee. He didn't have a ring box. He didn't need one. Camille, he said, his voice steadier than mine would have been. You've carried so much, survived so much. You're the strongest, kindest, fiercest person I've ever known. And Iris and I, we love you. We want to spend our lives with you. You don't have to say yes today. But I needed you to know that we're ready whenever you are. I didn't even blink. I said yes. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about choosing the future. Later that night, after Iris had fallen asleep curled between us on the couch, Theo laced his fingers through mine and whispered, I never thought I'd get to do this again. Love someone the way I love you. I turned my head, resting it against his shoulder. I didn't either. But love has a way of returning. Sometimes not in the form we expect, but in the one we need. Still, as the excitement of the engagement settled, and we began the slow process of planning something that felt right for us, a small wedding, beachside, simple and full of heart, I felt the past rise again. Not like a wave crashing, but like a whisper under the floorboards. I hadn't spoken to Julian since the night he disappeared. I didn't even know if he was alive. Part of me had accepted the not knowing, choosing instead to build forward. But now, with another wedding on the horizon, the ghost stirred. One evening while folding laundry, I found an old storage box tucked behind Iris's old science projects. Inside were remnants from a life I'd tried not to revisit, our wedding invitation, a dried orchid from my bouquet, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with Julian's handwriting. I froze. My fingers trembled as I held it, the paper worn, the ink slightly smudged. Julian had written me a letter, and for the first time in years, I was ready to read it. I stared at the envelope for what felt like hours. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly to the right, neat but rushed, the way Julian always wrote when he was trying to get thoughts out faster than his hand could keep up. It had my name on it. Just my name. No greeting. No to my bride. No Camille Hart. Just Camille. As if he didn't know who I would be when I finally found it. I sat on the bed, legs tucked under me, heart rattling like a loose drawer. I thought I'd buried that part of my life. Thought I'd moved on far enough that anything tied to Julian wouldn't have power anymore. But the truth was, there were still shadows I hadn't dared step into. This envelope was one of them. Theo was out on a late shift. Iris was at a sleepover. The apartment was quiet, the perfect kind of quiet to hear things I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Still, my fingers slid under the seal. Slowly, deliberately. And then the paper was open in my lap, and Julian's voice was in my head again. Camille, if you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I wrote this the morning of the wedding. I couldn't sleep last night, and not because of nerves. Not the usual kind, anyway. I love you. I need to start with that, even if you never believe it again. My eyes blurred. I blinked quickly and read on. I've made peace in so many areas of my life, but when it comes to you, I never felt worthy. You're this beam of light, this force that moves through the world with purpose and kindness, and I always wondered why you chose me. But I wanted so badly to believe I could be enough for you. That I could be the kind of man who deserved to stand beside you in every way. I felt my chest tighten. His self-doubt had always lingered under the surface, but he never said it outright. Never let me see just how much he feared he wasn't enough. I'm writing this because Lena called me last night. She said things that shook me. I won't write them here. Maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe I should ignore it. But what if I can't? What if I walk into today with this seed of doubt in my chest and ruin everything we've built? I hate that I'm even writing this. Hate that I'm letting fear hold a pen. But if I show up, I want to mean it. Every word. Every vow. Every step toward forever. If I don't, know that I loved you. Know that I believed in us more than I believed in myself. I hope this letter never matters. I hope it's buried under wedding cards and forgotten souvenirs from our honeymoon. But just in case. Julian. I sat in stunned silence, the letter trembling in my hands. He had written it hours before he left. He hadn't been cold. He hadn't been cruel. He had been terrified. And manipulated. Lena. Her name curled like smoke around my mind again. She'd always been a question mark in Julian's past, the one subject he skimmed over like a bad memory he didn't want to share. I hadn't pressed then. Now I wished I had. I reread the letter. Twice. 3 times. The same emotion welled each time, grief, not for the wedding, but for the truth that had been locked away for so long. The truth that Julian hadn't stopped loving me. That maybe he had never intended to leave, at least, not like that. I couldn't keep this to myself. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I found Diana Hart's number. I hadn't spoken to Julian's mother since the week after the wedding when she left a strained voicemail I never returned. I hadn't blamed her, exactly. But I hadn't known how to talk to her either. Now I did. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was weary, older than I remembered. Hello? Diana, it's Camille. A pause, then a soft intake of breath. Camille. I wasn't sure if I'd ever hear your voice again. I swallowed hard. I found a letter. From Julian. Written the day of the wedding. Another pause, longer this time. Then, you found it. You knew about it? I did, she admitted. He called me that morning. Said he wasn't sure what to do. Said Lena had reached out again. I told him not to listen. But he sounded lost. Like he was drowning. My heart clenched. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Because I didn't know how, she said, her voice cracking. Because I was ashamed. Because my son disappeared on the woman he loved and I couldn't fix it. Lena, she always had a hold on him. Emotional blackmail. Threats. She told him she was pregnant. That she'd hurt herself if he didn't come. He panicked. I pressed a hand to my mouth. She wasn't pregnant, Camille, Diana continued gently. There was no baby. It was a lie. One of many. Tears slipped down my cheeks, quiet, steady. A part of me had always suspected, but hearing it, finally, felt like being released from a chokehold I hadn't known I was still under. I don't know where he is now, Diana added. We talk occasionally, but he moves a lot. I think he's trying to disappear. From her. From the guilt. From everything. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Thank you for telling me. You deserve to know. After I hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time. Iris's drawings were pinned to the wall. Theo's jacket was slung over the couch. My life was here, present and real and beautiful. But this truth, this missing piece, felt necessary to finally let go of what had once been. Julian hadn't stopped loving me. But love, without honesty, without courage, wasn't enough. And now I finally had the chance to put the past where it belonged. Not as a wound, but as a closed chapter. The breeze off Port Linden's coast was gentle that afternoon, the kind of wind that kissed your skin rather than pushed it. Seagulls cried above, waves lapped softly at the shore, and the scent of salt mingled with lavender from the small bouquets tied to each chair. Everything was just how I had imagined it, simple, intimate, honest. I stood barefoot in the sand, holding Iris's hand while Theo adjusted the collar of his light linen shirt. Our officiant smiled warmly, waiting for the last of the guests to settle. My heart beat steady, not like it had at the first wedding. That day, I was a woman trying to believe everything was perfect. Today, I was a woman who knew better and was marrying someone who'd stood beside me through the wreckage. Iris squeezed my fingers, grinning up at me. She wore a pale blue dress with a crown of white daisies in her curls. You look like a beach princess, she whispered. I smiled. And you look like royalty. Theo chuckled beside us. I think she's running this entire wedding. That's because I am, Iris declared proudly. The music started, soft acoustic guitar strumming a familiar tune. Guests rose, and Theo and I turned to one another. No long aisles this time, no fanfare, just a walk forward together, step by step, toward the rest of our lives. But as we took our first steps, a ripple passed through the small group of guests. I saw heads turn, and then, my body stilled. He was there. Julian. I saw him standing at the edge of the ceremony, leaning against one of the dunes, thin and drawn and utterly out of place. He wore a suit jacket far too loose on his frame, and his skin was pale beneath the sun. His eyes met mine, haunted and raw, and for a moment, everything around me blurred. I heard Theo's voice, quiet and calm. "Camille?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod, stepping forward slowly, motioning for the officiant to pause. My heart thundered, not from fear, but something closer to disbelief. I hadn't expected to ever see Julian again. Not after the letter. Not after Diana's confession. Not today. He took one step forward, then another, and then his knees buckled. I rushed to him as instinct kicked in. "Julian." Theo was at my side in seconds, already kneeling as Julian collapsed into the sand. He was conscious, barely, his breathing shallow. I saw it immediately, jaundice around his eyes, the gauntness of his face, the way his skin sagged over protruding bones. "I'm sorry," he rasped. I needed to see you." We moved fast. Theo checked his pulse while I cupped Julian's face. "You're dehydrated. Exhausted. You shouldn't have come like this." "Didn't think I'd make it this far," he whispered. Iris had come closer now, eyes wide with concern. I turned to Mia, my best friend and maid of honor. "Can you take Iris back to the cottage? Please?" She nodded instantly, guiding Iris away, though the child's eyes remained fixed on Julian until she disappeared over the dune. We laid Julian gently on a towel in the shade, guests giving us space, murmuring their concern. Theo looked up at me. "We need to get him fluids. And he needs a hospital. He's not stable." Julian clutched my hand suddenly, desperate. "No. Please, don't take me away yet. I came to talk. To explain." His voice trembled with urgency, but his body was failing. "You can talk," I said softly. "But first, we need to help you. Just let us do that." He nodded weakly. "Okay." Theo and I worked quickly. Even on our wedding day, we were doctors first. I couldn't stop my mind from assessing symptoms, tracking his pulse, noting the slight yellowing under his nails. Signs I'd missed before. Signs I now recognized all too well. He had cancer. I knew it before he said a word. Later, after the chaos settled and a small mobile medical unit stabilized him enough for transport, Julian was able to sit up. His voice was stronger, but barely. "It's pancreatic," he said, confirming what I already suspected. Stage 4. I've been in and out of clinics the last few months. I didn't think I'd make it here in time. "Why today?" I asked, eyes locked with his. "Because I didn't want to die without saying I was sorry. Without telling you everything." Theo stood behind me, silent but present, a pillar of quiet strength. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the steadiness in it. He didn't see Julian as a threat, only a man chasing closure. Julian's gaze flicked to him. "You take care of her?" Theo didn't hesitate. "Always." Julian smiled faintly. "Good." We helped transfer him to a local facility where he could be stabilized overnight. He gave me a number for his oncologist in Boston. Said he didn't want to stay long, just enough to rest before going home to face what was left of his time. As we stood at the edge of his room, ready to leave, Julian reached for my hand again. "I never stopped loving you," he said. "But I let my fear choose for me. And I've regretted it every day since." I nodded, my throat tight. "I know." And somehow, in that moment, I forgave him, not to reopen a door, but to close it, gently, finally. When Theo and I walked back to the beach, the sun had dipped lower. The guests were gone, the chairs empty, petals scattered by the breeze. The ceremony would happen another day. But our commitment had already been made. In crises, we had found our way. And, even with ghosts still lingering, love remained. Whole, imperfect, and real. The call came 2 days after we returned from Port Linden. Julian's transfer to Boston had been arranged. He was at Bethany Oncology Center now, tucked away in a quiet room on the 8th floor overlooking the city skyline. I hadn't planned to see him again, but I kept picturing the way he looked as we left the beach, his shoulders slumped, voice raspy, eyes flickering with something like peace. Or maybe exhaustion. Maybe both. Theo had been the one to say it first. "You should go," he'd said gently as we stood side by side brushing our teeth. "He's part of the story. And you deserve to finish it." I didn't argue. I'd already packed a small bag before he said it. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something faintly citrus. Julian lay propped up against crisp white pillows, a thin blanket drawn to his waist. He looked older than he had even just days ago. His cheeks were more hollow, his hands lined with veins like river maps. But when he saw me, his lips curved into the smallest smile. "You came." I pulled the chair closer to the bed, sinking into it slowly. "You asked for me." "I wasn't sure you would," he said, voice still low but steadier than before. "After everything." I didn't know what to say, so I just looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't the man who had read a text and disappeared from my wedding. He was the man who had once danced with me under hospital greenhouse lights. Who had written a letter not out of cruelty, but out of fear. "You said you wanted to explain," I said quietly. "So explain." Julian let out a long breath, folding his hands on the blanket. "Lena. She knew exactly how to get to me. After we broke up, I cut her off, changed numbers, even blocked her on every platform. But the night before our wedding, she found me. Called from a different number. Said she was pregnant. Said if I didn't come, she'd hurt herself. And I didn't believe her. Not really. But I also knew what she was capable of." He paused, swallowing. "She tried things before. Manipulated emotions. Faked illnesses. And a part of me knew it was a lie. But I didn't want blood on my hands if it wasn't. So I left. Without telling you. Without thinking." "You could have come back," I said, voice sharper than I intended. "You could have called. Written. Anything." "I tried," he said, eyes brimming. "But by the time I got away from her, days had passed. I figured you hated me. And honestly, I hated myself. I wasn't strong enough. Not when it mattered most." I sat back, heart pounding with anger and grief and something else I couldn't name. "You left me in a room full of people who loved us, Julian. You left me wearing a wedding gown." "I know," he whispered. "And I've relived it every day since." There was silence between us, thick and strange. I looked around his room, the stack of books on the tray table, a sketch pad resting open with unfinished lines, a cup of untouched applesauce on the tray. "Why come back now?" I asked finally. "Why the wedding? Why then?" "Because I heard," he said, eyes meeting mine. "Through Milo. He told me you were getting married again. To someone good. Someone solid. I knew it wasn't my place, but I needed to see you. One last time." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. Not because I still loved him, but because there had been a time I did. And the pain he left hadn't erased the truth that we had once been something beautiful. Brief, but beautiful. "I loved you," I said softly. "I don't regret that. But I also don't want it back. That part of my life is over." Julian nodded. "I know. I didn't come to reclaim anything. I just wanted to give you back the story. The whole story." He reached beside the bed and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a sketched me, standing in the greenhouse, surrounded by orchids. It was drawn from memory, gentle lines capturing the softness of that moment when everything had felt new and full of promise. "I drew that the night before the wedding," he said. "I didn't want to forget how you looked that day." I blinked away tears. "You never really lost me, Julian. You just never gave yourself a chance to show up for me. That's what broke it." "I know," he said. "But thank you for coming." I stood, placing the sketch back in the envelope. "Goodbye, Julian." As I turned to leave, the door opened quietly and Iris peeked in. She'd insisted on coming with me, though I told her she didn't have to. She stepped forward now, holding something behind her back. "I made you something," she said, walking to the side of his bed. Julian smiled, startled but touched. She handed him a drawing, crayon figures, messy but vivid. For people standing together beneath a bright yellow sun. Above them, written in big, unsteady letters, it read, "My family plus Julian." Julian's hands trembled as he took it. His eyes welled again, this time with something closer to peace. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded. Everyone deserves someone to say goodbye to. As we left the room, I felt lighter. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I'd finally faced it. The past. The truth. The ending. Julian had come to give me a full circle. But I was already walking a new one, hand in hand with those who stayed. We didn't board the plane. Not that night, not the next day. The tickets to Santorini sat untouched on our kitchen counter, their glossy edges curling slightly at the corners. It should have been our escape, a week of sun, stillness, and long mornings without alarms or hospital pagers. But when Julian's transfer paperwork was finalized, and the doctor at Bethany Oncology said, he has days, maybe weeks, we knew the honeymoon could wait. Theo didn't hesitate. We stay. And somehow, that choice, quiet, immediate, only made me love him more. We took turns visiting Julian at the hospital, never together, always giving space where it was needed. I went in the mornings, bringing tea and crossword puzzles he never finished. Theo went in the evenings, sometimes sitting silently while Julian slept, sometimes talking about architecture and design in that calm, thoughtful voice of his. There was no jealousy between them, just mutual understanding. Theo never asked what I felt. He didn't have to. He already knew. I spent one last morning with Julian the day before our delayed honeymoon. The room was filled with soft light, filtered through half-drawn blinds. A gentle breeze came from the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of fresh rain on concrete. Julian was thinner than ever, his cheekbones sharp against his skin, his voice a low whisper when he spoke. But his eyes still held clarity. "You were always meant to live more than one life," he said quietly. I sat beside him, holding a small pot in my hands. Inside was a baby pothose plant, its heart-shaped leaves a bright green promise. "It's for you," I said. "Something to keep growing even when you're not here." He smiled faintly, still giving me pieces of light. I set the plant on the windowsill, adjusting it so the sun caught its leaves. "There's something beautiful about you too," he murmured, gaze unfocused. "You, Theo Iris. You're a constellation. I got to be a star in it once. Even if I burned out early." My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Not for him. For me." He nodded slowly, closing his eyes, the lines in his face softening. "That's more than I deserve. It's what we both needed." I stood a moment longer, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Then I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered goodbye. That night, we finally packed our bags. Theo made Iris her favorite pasta for dinner, elbow noodles with way too much cheese, and Mia came to stay with her while we were away. Iris hugged us tightly at the door, slipping a folded piece of paper into my hands. "Open it when you get there," she said solemnly. The flight was smooth, the sky blushing with the last streaks of sunset as we arrived in Port Linden again, not for vows this time, but for rest. We rented a tiny cottage by the cliffs, one with a porch that faced the sea and creaked with every wind gust. We didn't have a schedule. No sightseeing. No curated photos. Just slow mornings, hot coffee, and walks along the shore where the sand clung to our ankles and the world felt wide and forgiving. On our third night, we lay in a hammock on the porch, tangled together beneath a blanket as the stars blinked into view. "Do you ever wonder how we got here?" I whispered. Theo kissed the top of my head. "All the time." But I stopped questioning it. Some things just find their way. We fell into silence, the good kind. The kind that didn't require filling. The next morning, I opened Iris's note. It was a crayon drawing again, this time of Theo and me holding hands under a banner that read, "My grown-ups are brave." Underneath, in her crooked handwriting, "You're not sad anymore." That makes me happy. I smiled so hard my eyes burned. She was right. For the first time in years, I wasn't sad. I wasn't bitter or waiting or wondering. I had stepped out of the shadow of what could have been and into the warmth of what was. Julian passed away 3 days after we returned. I received a call from Diana. Her voice was calm, though I could hear the fatigue behind it. He went peacefully, she said. He asked to keep the plant by the window. Said it reminded him of you. I thanked her. Then sat in the kitchen, the late afternoon light spilling across the floor, and I let myself feel it all, the ache, the relief, the strange gratitude that he had come back, if only for a little while. Iris sat beside me and held my hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. That weekend, Theo and I finally unpacked our wedding gifts. The ones we'd let sit in boxes too long, waiting for the right time. We opened them one by one, laughing at the odd gadgets and smiling at the thoughtful ones. It felt like a cleansing. A closing of one door so another could fully open. We kept Julian's drawing of the greenhouse in a drawer. Not on the wall, not in a frame. Just tucked away. A memory, not a monument. The future, now, was soft and strong. We weren't rushing. We were building. A life of days both ordinary and extraordinary. A life that wasn't perfect, but was finally deeply ours.